You are listening to Cemetery Confessions, the world's #1 Goth Talk podcast.
Hello and welcome back to Cemetery Confessions, the show where we host different guests each episode to chat about goth topics relevant to our lives from a socio-cultural perspective. This week we're going to have a looser format rather than focusing in on one specific topic. We're going to be covering a number of different things. We're going to sort of talk about our predictions of the future of goth music and what we think the current state of the scene is. We're going to be talking about why clothing is relevant and what it actually has to say, both about goths in general and more on an individual basis. We're going to be talking about deathrock and what that clothing has to say. Has that become too static, too stereotypical, lost any sort of semiotic or transgressive meaning? And we're going to be talking about a bunch of other stuff. We'll review the new album from Dune Messiah. We've got Sinister Suggestions. We've got a few other topics to cover. So grab yourself a drink. I've got a trusty bottle of whiskey by my side. We're going to be relaxing, hanging out, chit-chatting, and just having a fun night. So if you are brand new to the show, our guests this week are, first of all, Michelle, our resident queen of goth, someone who has been involved in the scene from the early 90s, doing all kinds of cool scene stuff like modeling for goth clothing brands. And she's just somebody who knows more about goth music than Mick Mercer himself. So Michelle, thanks for coming on the podcast.
Wow.
Thanks for having me. I would not say that, but thank you for having me.
That's why I'm here. And of course, Andi, who needs no introduction, Andi Harriman, author of Somewhere Leather, Somewhere Lace, DJ and promoter in New York City. She lectures and travels the world spreading the word of goth to everyone all across our great planet. So Andi, thanks for coming on.
Happy to be here.
Although I regret saying great planet because I think it's pretty shitty at the moment. But
yeah, it really is.
Yeah.
That's besides the
Things
point.
aren't going well.
Everything is shit.
All right. So this episode is, well, it's not going to be different, but it's been a while since we've had a proper goth talk sort of chit chat about a bunch of different stuff rather than just focusing in on one specific topic. So we're going to cover a number of things. And I wanted to start with talking about music as it's the core of the culture. And I wanted to sort of reference this article from Sounds and Shadows. And I've got a very short snippet I want to read. But before I actually read that, I want to just sort of get your opinions on this idea. At the core of the article was that we still have too many goths that are only listening to stuff from the 80s and not supporting the music that's coming out today. And I'm interested on your take on that, if that's your experience or not.
I think that his intentions were good. My take on it is that goth is pretty much built off nostalgia anyway. So first of all, Peter Murphy is not 70. I took offense to that.
Yeah, same.
Yeah,
I was wondering if you were going to bring that up.
We can tee off on that in a second. Yeah, I'm going to read that a little bit. Yeah.
Peter Murphy is amazing live, and I would spend all my money on seeing him live. And The Cure. I mean, you're talking to me and Michelle. Michelle and I we love the old stuff. I mean, we also listen to new stuff, but
so
I think the intentions were good. I know. The intentions were good. I like how he brought up different bands that sounded similar to some of our favorite old bands. That was nice.
Right. Yeah.
Yeah, I think that was probably the best thing about that article. Regardless of what their philosophy around, we should listen to new bands, shouldn't glorify the old band too much. The idea of giving this transition to people who may have been out of the scene for a while or have only listened to their bands and haven't listened to other things. It's the idea of, if you like this band, here's another band that's similar to them that you may also like. And that's a great way of breaking the ice and breaking people into new music that they may love, but they've never even known about before. And I think I thought that was a really well done avenue to go down.
Yeah, I actually just got an email a couple weeks ago from someone in their 50s who said they only ever listened to 80s music. And one of the bands we played on the show, they really liked. And so they went off and checked out like all the recommendations we've made and just wanted to say that they had been listening to newer artists. I think, and I'm going to read this part of the article in a second, but I don't, at least in my circle of friends, both online and in person, I feel like there's a ton of emphasis on new bands. It's not necessarily like people are getting super into the really obscure current bands as well, like the really niche bands that only have a few followers. It's more, the well-known stuff. Like we were talking about Drab Majesty before the show, like that kind of thing. But I feel like there's still a pretty big emphasis now on the new stuff. And I think that comes as a result of the last, what has it been, five-ish years since the kind of post-punk explosion. And because that stuff has been out there for so long now and has been sort of saturating, I think a lot of people actually are listening to the new stuff. And I think the people you run into that don't know who those bands are and only listen to stuff from the 80s are becoming rarer and rarer, at least in my experience. And maybe that's just Chicago. I don't know, but.
No, I think you're right.
Go ahead.
I think you're right, but when you said saturated, that reminded me of conversations I have with my friends that the new music nowadays is becoming more saturated and bands are starting to sound the same.
Yes.
So I'm having a problem with getting excited about any new bands.
Yes.
And I think that happened in like the mid to late 80s as well, that, there's so many copycat bands of the originals that everybody just kind of got tired of it because it blew up into something bigger than they ever thought. And I think it's kind of doing the same nowadays.
Yeah, there's definitely there's a new cookie cutter sound. Like instead of everybody sounding like the sisters, everybody kind of starting to sound, I don't want to say like Drab Majesty, but this weird like sad synth. Like does that make sense?
Mm-hmm. Yeah, and we can just I'll read this section after that, but since you guys brought it up, let's skip to this. Well, actually, I do want to say real quick, I also think just from the beginning that I don't think it's necessarily a zero-sum game either, that I think people listen to both. And I think the people that only listen to new music or only listen to old music are pretty rare. But Andi, since you brought that up, this is one of the things I wanted to ask both of you, because we're at this point now where we have had this explosion, started off sort of as post-punk with these really kind of disparate sounding musicians experimenting with a lot of different sounds, and it started to sort of coalesce into more of a dark wave, sad synth, as you said, Michelle, sound. So I'm wondering not just what your take is on the music scene at the moment, but what you think is going to happen in the next couple of years, if you think that's going to have an impact on people going to clubs and what people are listening to and that kind of thing.
Well, my prediction is that it's going to do like it did in the 80s when this sort of synth and guitar sad sound started separating. So I think you're going to find a lot more like traditional instrument-based bands, like with two guitars, a bass, and maybe a synth, and like real drums. And then you're going to have more industrial music. So I think I have a feeling things are going to kind of split up, kind of like it did in the 80s with Wax Tracks, and then you had the 90s goth movement as well. That's just what I predict.
Mm-hmm.
But I'm starting to hear a lot more bands with traditional setups. And then I think, EBM and industrial is really having a good movement right now. That's where I find more excitement than in this sort of dark wave gothy scene.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah, I think like the EBM and industrial is taking off, but I think that both the EBM and industrial and the new crop of, say, dark wave bands, I think that in the coming maybe year or two, I think there's going to be a little bit of flirtation with, I don't want to say mainstream, but a little more wider recognition. I mean, if you look at the new Drive Majesty album, it actually charted on Billboard. I mean, really high up, but it still charted. And if you go back to the 80s, I mean, every major band was pretty much like on top of the pops, and
Yeah.
you know, they charted, they made radio impact, and not just, you know, college rock, not just indie radio, not just John Peel, but so I think that might happen. I don't think it's going to be, you know, I don't think you're going to get a new wave of stadium goth like the Cult or something like we had in the 80s, which is a shame because I like that. But
although,
I do think we're going to get we're going to get a little taste of that, I think.
Yeah.
Once the Cult started hitting like stadium play, they were pretty rock and roll and a lot less like goth rock. You know,
that's very true. I have a funny story about the Cult. My mother loves Aerosmith. It's a terrible, terrible thing, but she does. So they were playing Madison Square Garden, and the Cult were opening. So I was like, "Let's go! I can see the Cult. You can see Aerosmith." So we went, and the Cult are playing, and you know they're the opening act. Not many people are there for the opening act. And Ian goes, "All right, we're gonna play one of our old goth rock hits." And I swear to God, I think I was the only person in all of Madison Square Garden who screamed and yelled, like started cheering. And my mother was just like, "Sit down, you're embarrassing me." So, yeah,
I will, as a total aside, real quick, I will mention, and I'm holding this book up for the chat, but in the book 25 Years in the Reptile House, there's a section towards the back where he covers Sisters of Mercy, The Mission, and the Cult, and how they went from being these really small niche bands like Southern Death Cult up through, and like that he intertwines those three bands and their stories, and it's really, really interesting the way he tells it, and it's really fascinating to watch that unfold. So if anyone is interested,
I really like that book.
Yeah, that's a good book. Yeah. Do you know who you're talking to, Daniel? Of course you've read that book.
Not for you. This is for the listener. Of course, I know.
Except for the end, I didn't like how they made the end more about the popular rock. Is that the right book where they kind of talk about?
You know, I haven't read the last 80 pages. So
yeah, I think it falters a little bit at the end, but.
Trey, what's your prediction for the evolution of goth music the next couple of years?
I don't know. I guess I don't really have much of a prediction on how I think it will definitely go. I mean, I'm still steeped in the club scene, and the club scene is still stuck in the quote unquote danceability matrix where it needs to have this steady beat and all that stuff. And that's just a factor of the club scene, it seems, and it's been happening since the late 90s, early 2000s that's been sort of dominating. I had enjoyed the what I'm hoping to see is, you know, a revitalization of the post-punk explosion, but back to where the post-punk was originally. And I see some of that with the Wild West, that is your SoundClouds and your Bandcamps and just the crazy stuff you can find there. But I'd like to see just an explosion of that creative force where people are just doing whatever they think of and whatever shit, not trying to sound like anything else, not trying to fit into a specific genre. I mean, that's what I loved about post-punk in the 80s, is it was such a wide-ranging experimental music movement that birthed so many new genres. And you know, it was interesting, and I do enjoy some of them more than others. So the fact that they all calcified around certain sounds, and you know, this group became goth, and this group became new wave, and this group became industrial. It was interesting to see that, but I liked that explosion of creativity that led to all these disparate things. So I'd like to see us really do that more with this post-punk, because really the post-punk revival that happened 10 years ago was just focusing on kind of almost the Joy Division sound of post-punk and not all of post-punk. So I'd like to see more of that variety out there, and I'm kind of seeing it in hints and little places. I also like to see the explosion of world musics and those influences. I'm seeing a lot more cross-cultural pollination happening. That's really making music more interesting. So that's more what I'm hoping than what I'm predicting.
Yeah.
The cynic in me doesn't want to make a prediction.
Sure. I don't think that I wouldn't go so far as to say we're going to see bands like Drab Majesty hit stadium seating kind of popularity, because we have bands that are already doing that people conflate with goth, like Chelsea Wolfe or Billie Eilish, or there's that one electronic sounding band where all the members dress goth, and I can't remember the name of it.
Is
but
it Cold
they keep
Cave?
getting not Cold Cave. It's a female singer and I think two guys. And they're
pale something.
Pale
Waves?
whoever that is. Yeah.
Oh,
Pale
they're
Waves,
terrible.
that kind of thing. They are terrible, but
Sorry.
I
I don't
think
know
that is what's going to get the popularity, and I think what's going to happen is the sound, like Andy, you were saying, the sound is sort of becoming very similar. And I think what's going to happen is it's either going to move into more of a pop fan base, or it's going to move into more of an indie fan base. And we have a technical episode that just came out today with Bess Lovejoy. She said that she mentioned Lebanon Hanover, and she said they were getting play at clubs that had nothing to do with goth. So
wow.
I
Really?
think that, yeah, I think I'm more pessimistic, and I think that we've had too much of a good thing for too long, and we're going to go back to what it was kind of like after the death rock revival died out, where everybody got sick of everything sounding the same, and it just kind of disappeared. And I think that's going to happen, and like all the dark wave electronic synth stuff is going to move on, or the goth fans are going to move away from it, and we'll have like a smaller scene. But
I don't think it's
not
bad
to
for things to go
disparage.
back underground.
No, I don't think so either.
yeah,
But I mean, not to disparage like the death rock revival, but I think synth-based music and dance floor-oriented music is way more palatable, to the average person.
yeah, yes, yeah, that's true. Fifth Dream in the chat says, I'd argue if you can't dance without a heavy beat, you're not goth.
Well, there's that.
Stop.
Let me read this.
Before you do that real quick,
Yeah.
one thing I have found interesting is just the sort of influx of more interesting sounds within the pop music genre as well. I mean, you mentioned, Chelsea Wolfe is not really in that genre, but Billie Eilish certainly is. And that was a total curveball into pop music. I mean, there's a lot of pop there, but there's a lot of stuff that's really left field, which I found really interesting. And then, of course, my recent discovery, I don't really care for the song that much, but Old Town Road, which was number one for so long.
I love that song, and my son loves that song, and I don't
Do you
care
know
what anybody says.
Do you know what the underlying sample for the
I
rhythm
don't.
is?
Oh, it's Nine Inch Nails, right? Yeah. Mm-hmm.
Yeah, it's a Nine Inch Nails song.
Is that
the
Miley
underlying
Cyrus
sample.
song?
No.
Oh.
Well, Billy Ray Cyrus, there was a remix
Yeah.
with Billy Ray Cyrus singing. But it's kind of it's country rap.
The artist is Lil Nas X.
Lil Nas.
All I know
Lil
is
Nas
that
X.
I saw a photo of him on the red carpet for like whatever the MTV Awards the other night, and he was serving some Prince realness, and I was there for it.
He is
like Prince in the
adorable.
Revolution,
I
Purple
love
Rain
him.
era,
Yes.
and I was there for it because that was like my second crush. It was like Billy Idol and Prince.
Yes. Yeah.
That's
Well,
a good
I
pairing.
think he's fantastic.
I said Miley because she did that one music video for Black Mirror, and it's like basically that Nine Inch Nails song.
Yes.
Do you know what I'm talking about? It's literally the same song. Yeah.
Is it the music video where they're all doing drugs and there's like a giant teddy bear?
No, she has like purple hair. It's called Ashley O on a Roll.
Okay.
And it's like
Yeah, I remember that episode.
Yeah, it's literally it's head like a hole. It sounds just like it. I think it is supposed to maybe be.
Oh yeah, I remember. Yeah. Mm-hmm.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Very weird.
Sorry, I'm watching the music video. All right, so let me read this little snippet from that article and get your hot takes. I know this isn't the Gothquisition yet, but so they say this is a reason you hear the joke from DJs that the same request for this corrosion is what sends everyone running to the dance floor, and spinning the hottest new single doesn't seem to do the same. As someone who is really rediscovering the glory of astounding new music coming out in the last 3 years, after spinning the same records over and over for the previous 17, I truly understand. However, there is something else I have come to understand. Paying $80 to $150 to see the shrunken husk of 70-year-old Peter Murphy trot out on stage to sing the hits is nostalgic. However, I can tell you it wasn't close to seeing actors, Boot Blacks, Bellwether Syndicate, and Schedule 4 share a stage in Detroit, all in their prime, and play a mind-blowing, glorious audio assault for 4 beautiful hours, and have the bands give you a hug after the show for a mere $12. Perhaps seeing Bauhaus in 1981 was exactly like that, but I don't know because I was 4 years old.
Well, Andi and I just spent a little bit of time pretty close to the shrunken husk of Peter Murphy. And let me tell you something. There was not a person who, like, let's say, male-attracted person in that audience that would have kicked Peter Murphy out of their bed. He looked amazing.
Yep.
Mm-hmm.
He sounded amazing. He was, I mean, I don't want to say he was as sexy as when he was, like, you know, hanging on Daniel Ash in 1981, but that's a sexy man. Sorry.
Yes.
So,
and you know,
it wasn't $80.
And his voice is amazing.
Yeah, I don't.
And his voice
I don't know
still
where he got
sounds
that number
incredible. I mean, yeah, the VIP was crazy. It was like something like $200.
Oh,
but,
sure. Yeah.
I mean,
I think it was $45, right?
Yeah, I think it was like $45, and you hear the whole record in its entirety. And those early Peter Murphy records are so beautiful.
They are.
And, you know, I was going to go to the Bowie tribute, but I mean, obviously, unfortunately, his health took a very scary turn. But he was amazing. He was absolutely, and I've seen Peter Murphy a lot. I've seen Peter Murphy probably more than 10 times. And there are nights he's not in the mood and he's off.
Sure.
But he still sounds great.
Does that. Yeah.
You know, he still sounds great. And I've never seen Peter Murphy look bad or sound bad of his own fault. I mean, I saw him in a shitty outdoor place once. It sounded terrible, but that was not his fault. So, I mean, to me, he still delivers to me. So that's just my opinion.
I
still dream about him and wake up wet. Sorry.
Wow,
what?
That's amazing. I just don't see the problem with loving what you fell in love with, like why you fell in love with the goth scene. If it was Peter Murphy, why not take every chance you get to see him? Or like every time The Cure comes around, I know I'm spending all my money just because you never know. Like Peter Murphy could have died.
Yeah.
And that's it.
Yeah.
You know, it's not like they're young anymore. They're no shrunken husks, but they aren't young. I don't see the problem with it really. You're still supporting the scene. You're giving your money to.
Yeah, I mean, he's still touring.
Pioneer.
He's still doing stuff, right? Yeah.
Yeah, and he's still putting out records. I mean, they're not that.
Not very good.
No.
They usually have like 1 or 2 good songs on them.
Yeah.
I'll
sure.
say, but Daniel's sure they do. Okay, Michelle, fangirl.
Yeah.
Same.
Yeah, this is
you know, I don't like sorry, Trey, I'm going to interrupt you.
No, it's fine.
I don't okay, I realize I'm not an old person, okay, but as someone who is aware that I am aging, I don't like this sort of youth-focused veneration.
Yeah, that you have an expiration date.
If you're old, if you're old, your music doesn't matter anymore. I don't like that, and we kind of talked about this before, but it does still happen in the goth scene because what you get, like I get the nostalgia is part of the scene and sort of taking from ages past, but people are much more likely to share photos of young goth musicians rather than artistic photos of them now. And I think there's still this sort of veneration of youth that I'm not really. I think that's still an offshoot of this sort of like misogynist capitalist culture. So I don't like that idea of, oh, you're old now, so move over, grandpa. It's time for somebody else to take over.
Yeah, I
Yeah,
think
no,
this is
I
just
agree.
this is sort of just the flip side of the same. I mean, it's almost a backlash against the other people who just are so caught up in nostalgia that they won't even touch new bands. They say goth died in '83 or whenever year they decided to choose, and those are the only bands that matter. Those are the only bands they'll listen to, and everything else is fake. This is almost the opposite of that. And really, what it comes down to is somebody saying, "You don't like the music the way I like the music, therefore you're wrong and bad." And I don't think either way is right. You can enjoy the old bands, you can enjoy new bands. I mean, I think it's important for the scene to continue that new bands have some sort of embrace, just because, yes, we
Yeah.
can't demonize the old, but they do all die eventually, and eventually it's going to come down to they're unable to create new music because they're dead. And so then your scene is totally calcified because your scene is built entirely upon
Right.
recorded music, and there's nothing new, there's nothing fresh. But you don't need to go whole hog and say, toss the old bands out, shouldn't listen to them anymore, you should only listen to these new things because that's all that's going to matter. No, it's got to be both. And the old bands are what inform the new bands. Without the old bands, the new bands don't have the source material, and music in general is built upon its history in all genres.
So let's move on and talk about fashion a little bit. And I guess I'll pose this question, and then we can kind of get into discussion because I have a lot to say about this. But I want to cover this idea, and I'm basing this on. So in the show notes, I'll link to the video. I'm basing this on a video from Angela Benedict, but she's certainly not the first person to make this argument or to talk about goth clothing in this way. But to sort of boil down the core of that video, she is essentially talking about how she's trying to humanize goths and highlight the ways that we are similar to the rest of society by talking about how, I think she's like, we all take our dogs outside to poop. We get frustrated with our smart home devices. We cook and eat the same food, that kind of thing. And it's basically this idea that goths are essentially normal people just in spooky clothing.
I mean, I personally think you're being a little bit reductive on her theme. I don't think it was just we're all normal people.
I absolutely
with a superficial veneer of spookiness that is the only thing that makes us different.
So I'm kind of conflating a few different sources. I mentioned Angela Benedict just because it was the most recent thing I saw. I have seen other videos and other like blog comments say basically like that almost exact quote. We're just normal people that wear spooky clothes. So yeah, it's good to delineate that because I don't want to necessarily say that's exactly what she was saying. But
I mean, you get a similar impression from Gillian Vinters as well when she's talking about, basically a lot of these things are it's not demystifying, but it's basically trying to undercut the terror that has been built up in society around goth, which has ebbed a lot since the 90s. But that being its height, and just trying to, ease society back. It's like, hey, look, yes, we're different, we're strange, but we're not this totally alien, monstrous thing that's coming to steal your children. And, I think it's just, there is a bit of a backlash where people are trying to go, look, we're just regular people, just treat us normally. So maybe some of these articles and videos and whatnot are going too far in the other direction. Just trying to make us, as you say, just normal people that happen to be dressed all spooky for a veneer. So I mean, I kind of like the underlying message of some of these videos. In that, I don't think goths are this breed apart entirely.
Right.
We still exist in society. We still exist as part of the culture, maybe in the fringes, and our activities are just us doing ourselves and being whatever we want to be and not kowtowing to the underlying culture. So we're unwilling to bow and scrape when someone says, "Oh no, that's not how you're supposed to be," because of yada yada yada. But that being said, there's plenty of aspects of life that aren't defined by goth things. So you do things in life that there's no goth way of doing this thing so much, and we just still do it just like anybody else. So I don't
We
know.
actually had that argument before about the goths doing things video about the goth laundry.
Yes, I do remember that.
I won't trot that out.
Yeah, I don't know really how to comment on that video because I feel like in New York, everybody is a little weird, and never had anybody say like, "What do you do in your free time?" Maybe that's just me. Maybe I don't look extreme enough, but I have blue hair, and I don't know. I think New York is different. Maybe I just don't have that experience.
So your experience is that you go out looking however you look, and no one's really looking at you twice. You're like, oh no, another New Yorker wandering around doing their thing.
Yeah, not.
Yeah,
I mean, yeah, of course
very
I'll
few
get
people bat an
catcalled,
eye.
but
I don't. I've aged out of that. I'm excited.
I didn't know you could age out of that.
Well, I mean, considering it started when I was like 9, so I figure that I'm owed some peaceful time now at 42. So yeah, but I don't know about that whole. I think some people go to the other extreme, like going out of your way to make someone feel comfortable, which I'm not going to do. Like, to me, that's on you. Like, if you're that bothered by someone's hair or clothes or jewelry, you got a problem that I don't think I can solve. But I do think that in some ways there's kind of differences between, I mean, I, up until very recently, worked a very corporate job. Have you ever tried to make small talk with people? Like, I mean, now that Game of Thrones is over, I had nothing to say. I mean, I remember years and years ago, we had a big move, and so I was sitting around all new people I had never known before. And the guy next to me is trying really hard to like make conversation, and he's like, "What TV shows do you like?" And I was like, "I don't have a TV." He's like, "What?" I'm like, "I don't have a TV." And he literally said to me, he's like, "What do you do when you get home?" I'm like, "Oh, like I read or listen to records." He's like, "Records? Like records?" He's like the big black things from the 80s. I'm like, "Yeah." He's like, "Do they still make some big those, black things or are you just listening to this?"
Sorry.
He's like, "Do they still make those, or are you just like listening to the same stuff?" And I made the mistake of telling him that record store day was coming up. He's like, "You're gonna what? You're gonna do what?" So
yeah,
I mean, there is, and I don't necessarily think that's like a goth thing. I think that happens to all people who have niche interests. So I think if you were a cosplayer, or if you were a knitter,
right?
I mean, I think all people who have very specialized interests kind of exist in a plane where you're kind of like always going into a social situation going, "What the fuck am I going to say to these people? God damn it."
That's true.
And
I just wear a tail.
Right. I just think like for us, we have the extra that we have an outward appearance that belies the fact that we're quote unquote different. But I also think that there's probably, for goth people specifically, or people who listen to underground music in general, I don't want to say that we're smarter. I mean, I wouldn't go so far as to make a blanket statement like that, but I do think that there's certain sort of intellectual thing that makes you curious. I mean, what makes a person say, gee, the pop music that I'm exposed to isn't good enough for me anymore. I'm going to look further. You know what I mean? Like, you have some sort of curiosity where you're going to actively seek out things that aren't readily available. You know, that's how you're going to choose to spend your time, your money, your brain power at the end of the day. You know, you're going to search out stuff. And I think that that is sort of a fundamental difference between not just goths, but people who prefer things that are not mainstream.
Yeah, I think it's anybody who spends the time and effort to delve into what gives them joy, what gives them that passionate outlet, rather than just easing into what, everybody likes this, so let's check it out, and you enjoy it, and it's there, but it's what's, kind of fed to you, rather than seeking out your own personal joy.
Right. And you're not afraid to actually express that to other people, which takes a bit of courage, I think, as well.
So I think the way I want to kind of address that question is to look at opinions about fashion in goth culture, and then kind of share my view on whether or not goths and non-goths are similar, other than what we wear at the end of that. Because I think when it comes to the goth scene, everybody kind of has their own complaint about clothing. I actually just saw a post on Reddit not too long ago that was complaining that baby bats are saying clothing doesn't matter at all, and to be goth, you just need to listen to music, which is not what I usually hear. What I usually hear is people complaining. Complaining that baby bats only care about clothing and don't care about the music. So I think part of the issue is that whether or not these people, these baby bats, exist, I think presentation is being kind of used as a scapegoat for goths to define themselves against somebody else, to kind of define themselves as a truer or more authentic goth, to make themselves feel better. Whether you're saying that, either side of the spectrum, saying that there's too many fashions, which leads to superficiality and ephemerality, or you're saying that aesthetic is a necessary element of the creation for goth. I think in a way that we make a huge deal about these issues to reassure ourselves that we are more genuine or more true cult goth than other people. And we're kind of creating these straw men or these like abstractions. And, thinking about that question of whether or not we are essentially the same as everyone else, just wearing different clothes, it reminds me of, and this episode isn't out yet, Trey and I recorded this for Patreon, but in Carl Sprecklin's book, which was titled The Evolution of Goth, he talks about this idea that goth has to be transgressive, and that the notion of goths being these non-threatening, typical members of society kind of started post-Columbine as a way to distance ourselves from that type of violence.
I definitely
and he
agree
does
with that.
Yeah, he does mention like Jillian Venters and some other, he pulls out some blog posts from the time. And his argument is that this idea does a disservice to goth, because as a community, we have to be transgressive or subversive in order to have meaning. Like, that's the core part of goth. So I actually want to get your opinions on that, because that's, my opinion is going to be in a future episode, but I want to hear your thoughts on that.
Definitely post Columbine, I don't want to I don't want to say we got soft, but we got soft. I mean, yeah, there was definitely a softening of the edges. And for, you know what, for a lot of people, I can't blame them. I was out of school by the time Columbine happened, so I don't know how I would have dealt with it if I were still in school. And I was also in New York, which is very different from not New York. You know, very different from suburbia, very different from a smaller town. So, you know, it's very easy in New York to just say fuck you to whoever comes about and gets in your face about something. I mean, I remember the news trying to get into like a bar where we were having, you know, just like a regular, it wasn't like a club night, it was just like a bar night. And we wouldn't let them in. We kind of we sort of barricaded ourselves in the bar so they couldn't come in. And we were all just like sitting there like we're gonna wait this out. Like we've got microwave popcorn and whiskey. We're fine. And, you know, but a lot of people were super eager to go on TV and say like, no, we're just like you. We're not threatening. And we were just, oh, Jesus Christ, fuck you, shut up. Like, don't give them an inch. You know, like don't move the goalposts kind of thing. So, I mean, like I said, it's very easy for me to say like that, yeah, we got soft post-Columbine and very kind of kumbaya about everybody's welcome and everybody can be a goth if you just believe hard enough. I don't think that's true, but we've established that I'm a big fucking snob, so.
Andy, what do you think about that? What do you think about the idea that a intractable aspect of goth is transgression?
Yeah, of course. I mean, I don't want to say that it has to do completely with fashion though, because I've had really good conversations with people wearing Hawaiian t-shirts about goth music. But also you have to consider maybe those people that do those. My question is, on the Reddit board, are those baby bats calling themselves baby bats and saying we don't dress goth, but we are baby bats? Or are they just like new fans into the goth music saying we don't dress this way? And it's not as important to me because I think there's a difference there.
Yeah. I mean, do you want my opinion? Are you asking me?
If because they were saying they're oh, my accent came out.
Yeah, I don't think anyone actually calls anyone who is a young goth calls themselves a baby bat. I think that's applied to them by other goths.
Right. But if they're saying that fashion isn't important anymore and it's just the music, I wouldn't call them baby bats. I feel like diving into the fashion is part of that exploration, honestly.
Right.
But you can still be a fan of the music.
Well,
why not? Of course.
So let me ask you all this then. Let's make this a little more personal. Have you thought about why you dress the way you dress? Is it
because Fred Berger told me to? Sorry.
Mic drop. Bye. I love that answer. I dress that way because I think it. I don't know. I just think it looks good on me, and that's how I feel comfortable.
Mm-hmm.
I don't know. Unfortunately, I didn't have Fred Berger telling me what to wear.
Well, all jokes about propaganda magazine aside, that was a huge influence in my formative years. You know, you would run and buy the new issue and you would look and you would want what the people in the magazine were wearing. I mean, and in a way, I mean, I don't know if we're gonna get to Dorian's video, but in a way, when you're young, that is what informs you is media, whether it be music media or print media or now social media. You know, what you are looking at is the upper echelon of your scene is what's going to influence you. And I do think that, and I don't want to be like, get off my lawn, but I think that in the 80s and 90s, people were a little bit more inclined to be creative or DIY with their looks because we didn't have Killstar to just order it and have it delivered. You had to work a little harder. And looking back at some of like thrifted stuff that I remember wearing, there were a couple of days I looked a mess. I'm just gonna say,
Michelle,
but I only looked a mess for like $7 because we would go to this gigantic warehouse where everything was super cheap, or by the pound, and you would get bags of clothing for like $50. You would have 2 gigantic bags of clothes that nobody else had. Now, how you put them together was up to you. So it wasn't as cookie cutter, but I think you were still trying to follow a lot of what you saw. And I do think that the 80s and 90s, the images that were being put out were a little bit more diverse. I remember one of my first few times ever at a goth club, like a proper club, there was a girl in a vintage 20s dress, and she had like a bob, and she looked amazing. And like, that's something I never would have thought of. Who thinks of the 20s when they think of goth? You think of 80s or 1880s. But it was just like, oh, you can do that. You can put slightly different takes on this. So I think, like, for me, like, if you were to ask me today, why do you dress the way you dress today? I would say that this is what it boiled down to after 30 years of practice, or 20 something years of practice. Like,
well, I think Dorian said something interesting, was that a lot of people entering, I think you touched on this, Michelle, but a lot of people entering are looking to those people they admire, so they don't really have anything else to do but copycat, and then they come up with their own style, which I think is fine. And I think
well, that's part of being a baby bat.
Yeah. I also have been thinking about the thing about why things are more the same. And I think, well, one, it has to do with availability of all these clothes. It's just too easy to go online and buy something, or see something nice on Instagram and just buy it with a couple clicks. But also, we're so busy. I think it's hard to, unless you really have that drive to do something, it's hard to find the time on top of everything else to make your own clothes, learn how to sew, do all this stuff.
Yeah, like thrift, and so you could do alterations and stuff like that if stuff doesn't fit you.
Because everything's so readily available, it's just too easy to not do that.
It is easy, yeah. Convenient, yeah.
Yeah, I mean, it's not like there weren't like ready-made like goth clothes back in the day, but you had to order them out of catalog and wait 6 to 8 weeks for them
like
to show up.
bogies and stuff.
Oh God, yeah.
Oh my God, I think my grandmother bought me boots from Bogies for Christmas, and like placed the order in like mid-December, and I think I got them for like Valentine's Day.
Oh my God.
It was just crazy.
But I mean, and CDs. Remember when you mail ordered CDs?
Yeah, I do.
Or I remember even cassettes too, like mail ordered cassettes. Like, and then these stuff would show up, and you go, the hell is this? And you open it, you're like, oh, what a pleasant surprise. I forgot I ordered this. But I did a couple of times where like I ordered something and I forgot about it and then it showed up in like a local record store and I bought it. So then I ended up with two. No. That makes me feel stupid.
Trey, what about you? Do you have you thought through why you dress the way you do? Is there a reasoning behind it?
Sure. I mean, the inception of, I guess, my style has, evolved. There was definitely, like a lot of people, as I started, I was just going out, seeing people in magazines or at clubs or at concerts and going, yeah, I really like the way that person looks or that person looks. And, there are the other ones that I'm not really into that style. So I just kind of glommed on to the people whose aesthetic struck something in me and started emulating that and trying to find clothing that would be like that outfit or that pair of pants or that shirt or whatever. And I would do that. And then through the feedback loop of, emulating people, but then not wanting to look too samey. I don't want to be matchy. I want to kind of do something of my own. And then there's that little bit in me that just wants to tweak people a little bit, which is why in the first goth club, I was one of the ones who was known for going in all white every once in a while, just because I thought it was fun. It was a good way to stand out, a good way to be a little bit different. I mean, it was still Victoriana.
I do love when you give me a little tweak.
I know you do.
Just saying.
I was like, how did Dan let that go by? I'm like, he must have been zoning out. He didn't pick up on that.
He's in his cups a little bit. It takes him a little bit longer.
Yeah, you're usually way more on it.
Yeah. So, just I like to throw curveballs every once in a while, and I just sort of developed a style based on that. And then just, as I would go out and I'd get people paying attention to me or people complimenting me, that was just a reinforcement of, oh, hey, this is a more interesting and engaging way of presenting myself, because through most of my youth, I spent most of my time just trying to fade into the background. And so getting positive reinforcement for being unique and different encouraged that more. And, I'm not exactly the most, I guess, extravagant dresser. I don't do really out there goth to the nines and all of that. I don't even come close to that. But I like to, be comfortable in my clothing, but I like it to be what I choose to wear and not be concerned too much about what would be most acceptable, what would fit in the best. I had some, growing up, my dad was always very concerned about, again, I was still normal and fit into the background, but we'd be, getting ready for the school year. And it's like, oh, we got to look at what's in fashion and what is normal and what everybody, what they all want to wear. And I was never really on board with that. I was like, no, I don't really want to go for that sort of thing. I just kind of want to do my own thing and be comfortable. And then it was downplay or, more low key. And I just found additional things as I experimented in subcultural styles and all that stuff. And it was also very helpful, as much as we lambasted it in the 90s, the style cataloging, the various, oh, I'm a romantic goth, I'm a corp goth, I'm a death rocker. I kind of enjoyed that not because I wanted to fit into one of them, but because I liked to change it up. And I like to, I'm going to be a fetish goth this week at the club. And this week I'm going to go full on romantic goth. And then I'm going to go rivet head. And then I'm going to go, lazy goth in jeans and a band t-shirt. And, kind of just switch up the style like that and try to do stuff. So I like to play with those things and play with those archetypes. So that's kind of how it was the inception there. And I still like the archetypes because they're fun to toy with and they're fun to mix and match. But I don't, like the idea that, once you've chosen an archetype, you have to just be that archetype and you have to do it the best. I like bouncing around too much.
Yeah, I'm kind of similar. If there's a dress code for a night, it makes me just not want to wear what the dress code says. Like, I really hate when people try to boss around what you should wear or what you should look like.
Yeah.
Yeah, I don't know why I do that.
Did they ever try and put a cloak and dagger in New York?
No, they didn't, but they have some like they have a couple nights that are like you have to dress a certain way, and I'm just like, I'm not into it. I'd rather just do what I want.
Yeah.
I do think that's enforced though? I don't see that.
I think Cloak and Dagger did enforce it.
Cloak and Dagger,
I know.
I think that they definitely do it, but I've never heard of anybody.
Which, by the way, they're not in Chicago anymore, and they're kind of a joke now, which I'm glad about because everyone was like, "Oh, a cool new club from LA. We have to take it seriously," and now everyone just kind of makes fun of it.
I mean, I did want to check it out. I just never got around to it.
Yeah,
that didn't last long.
That's fine. We can take the piss out of it. Yeah, no. So I did think about this question because I knew I was going to ask it. So I have some thoughts about for me, I like to think philosophically about what are the reasons behind why I do certain things. So as I was thinking about this, I think a lot of common, and I've definitely used this before, but the sort of response of, I feel comfortable when I wear this. I think that's a fine answer, and I think that gets used a lot, but I don't necessarily think that's an explanation for the kind of underlying experiences or ideologies that drive how we live out our existence and how we choose to express ourselves. So for me, when I was younger, and I was a completely different person when I was younger, but as a youth, it was pretty simple. Goth clothing was a way to mark myself as an outsider and to, at least in my head, reflect everything that was wrong with society back at that same society. Whereas today, when I think about why I wear the clothes that I do, it's really multifunctional. So there's a bunch of different reasons for the way that I dress. Part of it for me is creating an ambiance, or kind of bringing forth that ambiance into a physical space, because I really like the idea of goth as this ethereal dramaticism and this romantic, uncanny, this feeling. And so dressing the way that I do kind of brings that into a physical space. There's, I think, the obvious function that most people would agree with, which is sort of marking yourself as a fan of certain music and kind of signaling to other people that may be within your group that you're also within that group. And then there's this idea of clothing being discursive, being a two-way conversation. So depending on what I wear on any given day, I'm kind of presenting a part of myself or a philosophy to the world. So, like, for example, I have one of my my vests has a back patch that says, "Your heart is a muscle the size of your fist. Keep loving, keep fighting." And I know that's kind of a generic patch that a bunch of people have, but that's a very specific philosophical statement. So that's pretty explicit. And then as a more subtle expression, it's just the general embodiment of the uncanny, of the other, and kind of making strange those expected social conventions. Part of the, going back to being discursive, part of that, at least in my head, is this idea that people who look at me, and I, like last weekend, I went out with my wife and my son. We went to a restaurant. We walked around a bit, and every single person we encountered looked at me. And so in my head, the what I tell myself is that my appearance, in a way, serves to reflect back to the viewer through extremity the question of why did I react to this person the way that I did, which I'm sure most people don't, but ideally it's this idea that this is a weird person. I think they look weird. Why do I think they look weird? That kind of thing. And then for me personally, the other thing is just sort of being out in the world and looking different, wearing an earring, having a shaved head, wearing nail polish, having kind of a mix of gender identifiers as a way of legitimizing alternative pathways, alternative ways of being in the world, and kind of affirming support for marginalized communities. You know, if I wear a rainbow pin or something like that, just looking different than what one would expect is a way for me to normalize different ways of being. So I think it's a good response to say, well, you know, you wear polos because you like them and you feel comfortable, and I wear combat boots because I like them and I feel comfortable. But really looking at the sort of divergence between the reasons behind wearing a sundress or wearing a leather daddy top or something. I think those have like fundamentally different reasons for being.
Like I wonder how many men who wear polos actually think about it.
That would be a fantastic ethnographic research project.
Well, it's funny because somebody actually once like said to me like why are you it's kind of like, why are you dressed like that? And I was like, I don't know, why are you dressed like that? And they were like, well, what do you mean? I'm like, well, you're wearing gym clothes. Are you going to the gym? And they're like, no. I'm like, then why are you wearing gym clothes? And they couldn't answer. So I'm like, kind of like, well, I don't have to answer you. You don't have an answer for why you're wearing athleisure. Like,
sure. I mean, there's practical, there's like practical reasons, right, and there are cultural reasons.
Right. And I'm like, well, you don't owe me an answer, so I don't know.
Right. Yeah.
One either.
Although I think there may be very similar reasons as to why men wear polos, right? Because they're, you know, partially signaling that they fit within a certain group. They're signaling, you know, if they're wearing sports memorabilia, that's a semiotic signaling, much in the way wearing a band patch or a band shirt would be. This is a thing that I'm into. This makes up part of my identity. This is, you can kind of assume what sort of hobbies I have and what sort of projects I get up to in my spare time, whether or not it's explicitly considered and thought out as to why these are chosen. And I think some people do that. I think a lot of people do that that aren't goth, whether they're men or women or other. So I would argue, I don't think that the reasons anyone dresses a specific way are too terribly different, sort of at bottom. I wanted to bring up this other, maybe I'm making too much of this, but I think there's an implicit contradiction when we're talking about like Instagram goths, where we have these two sides. We have people deriding baby bats for injecting new ideas or outside influences into the aesthetic of goth culture, for example, New Goth. And then goths also deriding people like, for example, you guys brought up deathrock. We're going to get to that. But people who look like an outdated stereotype, something that's predictable or something that could be called conforming, which I think ends up leaving this kind of small space somewhere in the middle where you have to navigate not conforming too much and not being seen as like a static stereotype, but also not experimenting too much and being seen as kind of shifting your identity rapidly. And I think, again, whenever Instagram gets invoked in goth circles, we kind of create these straw men or these abstractions where the Instagram people are too consistent or they're too transient, and those are used to call them inauthentic. But we don't necessarily apply those same standards to ourselves, because when we think about ourselves, we think about our lives as sort of a continuum of gradual change and gradual experimentation, but we don't allow those same affordances to other people. I don't know where I'm going with that, but let's talk about deathrock. You brought up Dorian. What are your thoughts on deathrock and the DIY aesthetic? And is that making a different statement than goth clothing? Is it too consistent and too out of date? Do you kind of agree? I don't know if anyone watched his video. I think they go by he, him.
I think
But I don't know
they.
if
It's they.
Is it they?
I
Okay.
thought
I don't know
it-
if anyone watched their video.
Yeah, I did.
I did.
Yeah.
I did.
Yeah. So what are your thoughts on that? Like, is that a legitimate criticism that deathrock is too just stereotypical?
Or were they talking? I think. Well, I do think that. I think deathrock was a specific example they gave, but I think they also touched on cybergoth
Yeah.
Mhm.
and trad goth. Also being a little cookie cutter.
Well, a lot of that,
And-
those styles, they became calcified.
Sure. Yeah.
I just thought it was interesting they said something like the reasoning why you should try to be more original is because if you go to a party and you look like your friends, you're going to be outed as the hot one, the ugly one, the weird looking one. I thought that was strange. I guess that came from personal experience, but I thought that was very strange.
Or personal
yeah.
opinion?
I don't know. I don't really. If I see a group of them, I don't
the
do
video
that.
struck me as odd too.
Yeah. I think that's kind of judgy, kind of elitisty.
Yeah. I don't know. I think if you're friends with people because you have the same interests, right? So
Right. Yeah.
I don't see anything wrong with kind of looking the same. I mean, they used a photo of Adora, I think, and like 3 of her friends, all with like white hair, which maybe they planned that to be cute.
Mhm.
I mean, I can't really judge. I thought it looked not terrible.
Yeah.
mean-
I think it might be that idea of how do we police or create boundaries around, if creativity and individuality is core to the ethos of goth, how do we identify that? Sorry, what were you going to say, Trey?
I was going to say that some of it could just be also a defense mechanism around self-esteem. If you've got aspects of your appearance or just yourself that you're not comfortable with, and you don't want those to be pointed out or noticed by other people, doing something outrageous that basically like a magician's trick is like, look over here, don't look at the thing I don't want you to see. And maybe that sense of I just want to be so unique that everybody is going to focus on that uniqueness. Whereas if I'm the same, people will still focus on, well, what makes this person different from the other people, even though they're all dressed the same. And they may focus on that one thing that you really don't want them to see, whether it is that you're the short one, the tall one, the fat one, the ugly one, the whatever that thing is that you're personally not happy with about yourself. Maybe there's some of that where it's that defense mechanism of just trying to distract from what you don't want people to see.
Yeah, I think the people who are the most unique do rise to the top and kind of do become more popular on whatever numbers with Instagram or whatever. But I also think it's a lot of pressure for them because they have to keep looking different. They have to change, while some of us can stay in this place where we feel the most ourselves. They have to keep evolving and constantly finding new ways to stand out. And I think would be a lot of pressure.
So I can speak a bit to that just because of stuff I do as regards my my job and some of our social activities. So I have a standard, business office job, and I've been there for about 7 years now. But we have a holiday party every year, and because I just felt, I don't know, kind of out that first year, I decided to go out to the holiday party. It was sort of a, you can dress sort of formal or whatever you want, do whatever you like, but it's kind of a fancy dress party. So I go out and I get basically a stark white 3-piece suit, a white top hat, and a cane. And I go out like that to my company holiday party. This is the first year I've ever been there. I mean, I know these people kind of, but it was definitely, all right, I'm just going to go crazy with this. And it was a hit. Everybody was they loved it so much. And then the next year, around October, November, I started getting the questions, what are you going to wear this year? What are you going to do next year? What's going to happen? And so every year there's this pressure of, all right, how do I at least meet or top or whatever? How do I stand up to the history and the myth, especially with people coming and going, and then new people come in and they're talking with their team and like, oh, you should see Trey at the holiday party. I'm like, oh my God, no, what have I done? So, I mean, I can kind of see that when you just set yourself up for that sort of thing. And it's both flattering and just immensely stressful at the same time.
All right, so let's close out talking about this article from sense.com. So I'm not going to read this whole thing. I pulled out a few paragraphs I thought were interesting. Link in the show notes for anyone listening. So the first paragraph I'm going to read states, the goth is looking for a different world than the one she's stuck in. The social contract is a hoax, and she's the apathetic whistleblower. There's something utopian in this way of navigating culture, of staring side-eyed at the present. The goth refuses to accept the status quo or to play well with others. Instead, she creatively occupies a new register of being. She accepts the darkness and shields the light. She chases her own goth utopia by resisting the pressure to fit in or to care, really. So I guess the question I wanted to ask here is this idea of what that reminded me of is this sort of sense from the 90s of goth being this kind of embodiment of nostalgia, of fantasy, of a different world being created. And I don't feel like this is relevant anymore, that people aren't talking about that. I think the most relevant thing people are talking about is whether or not goth is political and what kind of ideals or norms that we support in broader culture. But I don't hear anyone talking about goth as a feeling, as a atmosphere. And I don't know if that's your experience as well, or maybe I'm just old, or maybe I'm out of touch. I don't know. I know, obviously, Michelle, you live that every day because you're the queen of goth. But
I mean, I still think it's a feeling and it's an atmosphere. It's not. I mean, to me it never was. I'll be upfront. It was never like rebellion for me. It was never to be in somebody's face about something. I had nothing to rebel against. I mean, other than if you want to say like, I don't know, basic societal beauty standards, maybe. But other than that, I kind of didn't have anything to rebel against. So for me, it was never, looking the way I looked was never confrontational. But it was definitely always incredibly important to me, and it was always something that I prized, and I always thought that it was completely natural, that it went with the look. You know, I wear black on the outside because black is how I feel on the inside. All that, you know. So to me, they were hand in hand. So to me, of course, it's an atmosphere and it's a mood. You know, hashtag
Goth mood. Side note, I thought this was written so beautifully. Like, this is the sort of stuff I love to read with all the adjectives, and I just thought it was so beautiful. But yeah, for me, it is kind of a fantasy. Well, when I was starting out, I would watch the movies and look at the photos and, listen to the music. And it was all this sort of nostalgic fantasy that I like to play out, thinking that, oh, I could relive that if I, dress this way. And I thought this article spoke to me a lot, actually. Maybe it's not as like fantasy like anymore, maybe because I'm older, but when I was starting out, it really, that really resonated with me.
I guess for me, there's a bit of
it's so all encompassing.
There's a bit of a conflict, I guess, for me with how this is expressing this idea of fantasy or escapism or apathy, because my experience was that before I found anything out about goth and was just living in the normal world as a kid, that's where I felt my highest apathy was. I just didn't really care, and the world around me was just kind of drab and boring, and I just kind of was sleepwalking through life. And it was through the discovery of the beauty in goth and some of the aesthetics, some of the stuff that I enjoyed, that I actually started to engage with the world and engage with the things around me. So I think I became less apathetic as I started moving into the subculture, and really wanted part of my expression in the world is, this world is something that we exist in and live in, and I want to engage with it and make it better. And I want to, I guess, lead by example. I want to do the things that, I think this is a problem in the world, so I want to confront that. And I don't think that's a sense of apathy. It's not a sense that I want to escape the world or go into a fantasy or, pretend I was born in another era. I want to take the things I love in this world and the stuff that I think are problematic and do something about them by exemplifying what I feel is an improvement, a better way of doing things.
I think you can do both. I mean, you could still have that want for fantasy and to be in a different time, but you can also confront the present and do positive things. I don't think that it has to be one way or the other.
Yeah, I agree. All right, so the next part I wanted to read says, goth as a subculture, as a radical fashion choice, as a post-punk gesture, has outgrown its fringe beginnings. From the early days of the UK punk scene to the dark wave music of the 80s, to goth's supposed peak in the 90s and its spread across the US to suburban malls nationwide, goth has lived many lives. It shape-shifted into a performative catharsis adopted by sad girl Tumblr and inspired a resurgence of Winona Ryder circa 1990 cosplay. In lesser hands, the thick eyeliner and ripped elbows of the mall goth has gentrified into something far sleeker and more sterile. Goth has, at its worst moments, become a toothless millennial lifestyle choice. Gone are the days of goth's griminess, its association to the otherworldly, to the freakish, to the morose. In its stead, charcoal-filtered water and all-black athleisure wear.
Yeah, I mean that's I had a very similar reaction to this article that Andi does. I think it's beautifully written, and it's written basically as a poem. It's a prose poem, the whole article, and it's very well done. I happen to disagree with it fairly supremely in a lot of aspects.
Yeah.
But the beauty of the expression is great, even if I disagree with what they're trying to convey in a lot of places. And that's why I was kind of torn when reading it. It's like, oh yeah, this is really enjoyable to read. This is really great, but no, no. But as far as this particular paragraph, I don't I think this is still more of that the sky is falling type of thing. This paranoia about, oh my God, normal people are wearing black and it's being gentrified and it's removing all the meaning and value. And, like I said in the video about the Carl Spracklen book, I don't think goth is about being edgy and transgressive for the sake of being edgy and transgressive. I think it's being edgy and transgressive because, well, we like what we're doing, and it happens to be edgy and transgressive because the rest of society doesn't have the same aesthetics or the same interests as us. But we're not doing it to spite the rest of the world. We won't all of a sudden be wearing Nike and sports T-shirts if everybody else is all of a sudden dressing black. That doesn't make any sense to me. So this feels like the same thing, is how it's talking about how, oh, it's no good. Our aesthetic is lost all of its edge because toothless millennials are just dressing that way for Tumblr feeds. And the thing is, I think the reason that the aesthetic gets used in the mainstream is because it's trying to express some of what has been associated with goth. When somebody wants to look edgy, they dress goth because goth has an association with edginess or darkness or sadness or whatever.
Discontent, fatalism, nihilism, whatever
exactly.
it is.
Yeah, it still has that meaning. And we may be dressing it because we're expressing those aspects of our personality, and other people may be just picking it up for an afternoon because they feel angsty that afternoon. And I don't have a problem with that. The meaning is still there, and it's not necessarily being watered down, because if it gets watered down by that, people will stop doing it because it stops having that meaning. And then we can go back to being edgy ourselves because we won't have changed. The rest of the world just shifted towards us and then back away from us again. And we just kept on going.
Yeah, I think, going back to the idea of the kind of abstraction that we use, I like, look, I understand, and I've talked about why Tumblr goth and Instagram goth is obnoxious, but I think we also have to recognize that these are generally kids that are trying to find their tribe, trying to find a way to express themselves, trying to craft their own identity and their own agency in the world they live in. And I don't think they're trying to maliciously steal from or make fun of goths or change the culture. I think they're just young kids trying to find themselves. And there are people that fit that kind of Tumblr goth stereotype that are doing harm. But I think in general, it's more of a just an abstraction that we can use to point at those people who are ruining these things, And they bring up, athleisure wear, which is, to me, was funny just because health goth hasn't really been in like the blogosphere for quite a while, and I didn't think that was really a problem anymore. The whole health goth and new goth and pastel goth thing, that was this huge existential crisis when, like, back when the podcast started. It predictably isn't really a thing anymore. So it was just kind of funny that showed up as trying to kind of restoke those fears of meaninglessness through corporate imagery.
I think they're really just trying to establish this idea that the quotidian is being flavored by the fringe, and so they're taking something very everyday. You're thinking suburban housewives, suburban moms going out to the gym in the middle of their manicured day, putting on their sweats and athletic wear and athleisure wear, but they're taking that normal stuff that everybody associates with the banality of suburban life and making it black and thus edgy. And I think that's what they're trying to get at there. It's just this idea that when you've taken things that have this cultural ideal of being very boring and blasé, and then putting another thing with it, a palette that has this edginess associated with it, and it's that sort of thing that's just, I guess that's what's making it toothless. I don't know.
Yeah, but I mean, I remember when it was like a really big deal if you had skull jewelry or a
Yeah.
skull on your shirt, and now I literally just bought as a gift somebody knitted skull baby booties for their infant. I mean, and that's normal now. So yeah, I mean, the road rises to meet you a little bit at some point. Things are commonplace now that never would have been 10, 20 years ago.
Well, I mean, that's kind of part of the question, is if the goal of transgression is to push culture forward, to push past the boundaries of what's accepted in order to prove that, human expression exists beyond whatever these sort of puritanical boundaries of what's acceptable is. Once that transgression becomes acceptable, is that a bad thing, or was that the goal the whole time? Like, I don't necessarily think you can have it both ways.
Yeah. And I mean, for me, speaking personally, like, to agree with Trey, for me, it was never edginess. And God, I hate that word. It was never edginess for the sake of edginess. I was not going out to like offend the normies or whatever you want to call that. Like, even as young as I could possibly have been and being into goth, like, that was just not on my mind.
It wasn't to kick against the machine just because the machine existed. It was to
No.
It was an expression of identity.
I had maybe transgressive opinions on society, and I maybe did things. I've been fairly political my whole life, and there are certain things I've always had very, very strong politically motivated feelings about, and I've done activities. I've done ACT UP protests, and I've done gay rights protests and get out the vote things and stuff like that, but that wasn't, I think I would have been doing that without being goth. I mean, maybe not as young as I was, because I definitely credit Diamant de Galas for my militant AIDS activism as very, very young, but I think it would have come anyway, considering the world around me and the people around me.
So let me just read this last, I'll skip everything else and just read this last bit here. Let's see. Yep. So they say, some will say that all we have are the pleasures of this moment, but we must never settle for minimal transport, writes Jose Munoz. Yes. Quote, we must dream and enact new and better pleasures, other ways of being in the world, and ultimately new worlds, end quote. Dreaming new worlds is more than self-care. It's a survival tactic. So even if we think the utopian potential of goth has waned, its disobedient roots can be dug up. While a strain of goth now exists as part of polite society, there's still room to choke collar the normal, to insist on the troublesomeness of the concept, and to thrash against the call to conformity. So this is the reason I read that last is because this is kind of clearly the opposite of the idea that goths are just normal people in spooky clothing. It's this call to create new and better worlds. But the thing is, I don't think that either of these are mutually exclusive, because we all live in a society, and the reality that we construct changes from moment to moment and from place to place. We can both humanize and find commonalities through civil discourse, while also tearing down old caustic structures of culture that harm people. I've talked before about how there can exist a multiplicity of ontology from person to person and from goth to goth, but we should realize that we ourselves are multifaceted and complex, and by extension, the culture to which we belong is also fluid and contingent and interactive. So I think, to get back to just this idea that came post Columbine, the idea behind presenting goths in a more relatable way, I think is laudable, but it's this idea that there's a syncretism of human expression. Like, we're different, but we're alike, that we are by nature this complex web of interactions. And, goths may be united by these foundations of what the culture is and identify ourselves in that way. And that may be similar or different to broader culture, but we are still humanisms. We are still humans. We are still organisms existing within a broader context, and bringing some, going too far in either direction, I think, is a mistake. I think realizing that we are all part of these webs of interaction, and that we are similar but different, and that's okay, is important. And I'm drunk, so I don't know if any of that made sense.
Well, I mean, I'm going to say, yeah, I agree with what you said there. There's a line, and again, we're not a hive mind. Just being a goth doesn't automatically program you with specific identity. But yeah, I mean, of course, I mean, anybody. I was watching Angela's video and I was flabbergasted at the things she said about her coworker or her friend being surprised that she had cookies in the house or something like that. It's like, what? That's not, you're not a smart person if you you are just not smart.
Well,
if you think that, like, it's humorous. It's a humorous anecdote, but it's like, what do you think she does? Just goes home and hangs upside down and gets sustenance from the tears of others? I mean, that's just like, it's so nonsensical that it's almost like, I mean, it's
absurd.
It's absurd. It's, but at the same time, like, I said to a coworker once, I overheard that they were going to Walt Disney World, and I was like, oh, I'm so jealous. And they're like, I cannot picture you at Walt Disney World, which on the surface makes sense. So I dragged out, a photo of 16-year-old me, like, practically strangling the life-size Winnie the Pooh. And they were floored. They never, looking at me, you wouldn't think that I would absolutely humiliate myself and run past a line of children that I didn't notice just because I saw Winnie the Pooh.
Mm-hmm.
But that happened, and it would still happen today if I were there. So that, yeah, there's two sides to everything. Of course we're human, but again, if you ask me if I watched The Voice last night, I did not, and I'm never going to. So there are some things where it's just not going to happen, and there are some things that, yeah, we're like regular old people.
That's the thing. Like,
cookies.
I mean, those fundamental distinctions are kind of, to make it political, which go ahead and unsubscribe. I don't give a shit. There are people who think fundamentally differently about Mexican people that come to America without going through the legal system, whether they're fleeing, whatever harm it is. And for some reason, they think that those kids and those people don't deserve basic human rights, and they don't care what happens to them. They just want them out of the country, because we make these broad assumptions that this other group of people aren't the same as me. So I think in that respect, the idea that we need to kind of get ahead of that and say that, like, there are basic human and organismal expectations for from an ethical consideration, I do think that's valid.
Oh, absolutely. And yeah.
But
yeah, anybody who tells people in this day and age to not get political, I just want to smack them.
And I think it's just a general reductionism that as humans we're kind of prone to. It's a lot of effort to, when you pass someone on the streets, look at them and envision this idea that they have this full, rich, complicated life just like you do, with diverse family and arguments and disagreements and loves and hates and all of this complexity, when it's so much easier just to look at them, pick up some arbitrary aspect of their presentation or their behavior and go, I see the box that fits into. I'm going to put it neatly in that box, and everything that's true of what's in that box is true of you, and I don't have to think about it anymore, and I can just move on with my life. And it's very easy to just fall into that trap, because it is a lot of work to try to imagine everybody with full richness that you, of course, view yourself as having. And so it's not uncommon for people to do things like the cookie anecdote from Angela's video, because having fresh baked cookies doesn't fit in that box of, scary goth queen. And because of that, it is something that takes them aback. And that's one of the reasons that I like to do, kind of those things where I just do something just bizarre, because I like to sort of break people that little bit. It's not necessarily about being transgressive, but it's about towing the line about, oh yes, I fit in this box, and oh look, I just jumped out of the box. What are you going to do with it now? And how do you recontextualize your world to make that make sense? And I enjoy doing that element of surprise and, oh, you're not what I expected. Maybe I need to re-engage with things and think about it a little bit more. And that's kind of the idea that I approach the world with, is just trying to make people stop and think a little bit more, instead of just being able to easily slide everybody in their little boxes and move on with their lives.
Yeah, I mean, how many times have any of us heard the line, wow, when I first saw you, I thought you were pretty mean. I didn't think you'd be nice at all.
Yep.
Album review.
So let's do the album review. So we are talking about Dune Messiah. I pulled a snippet off of their SoundCloud or Bandcamp page just to give an idea of how they define themselves. So it says, Dune Messiah develops misanthropic persona on the new album, Moments in Bliss. The Danish folk noir artist Dune Messiah unfolds a universe of black romance and mysticism. On March 29th, he is publishing his second studio album, Moments in Bliss, through French label Third Coming Records and German label Aufnahme Wiedergabe. Thank you. Throughout the album, we get to know a kind of isolated character express his bitter emotions and pity for humanity. A misanthrope who is outside the common society and sometimes with a sense of jealousy tries to reach out towards it. The character often finds himself hopelessly in love with a female figure or in hateful envy and with a burning desire to destroy or degrade the female figure as a reaction to this. In the song Silence and Surrender, the man behind Dune Messiah, Magnus Westgard, sings, quote, "They say that forgiveness is a way to be free, and Jesus told us all to turn the other cheek. Within silence and surrender, there has been a way of showing you the faces of the people you betrayed." So I'm going to play a track from the album, and that is track 8, which is titled, I got to pull up the link, A Moment of Bliss.
Your darkened thoughts are faded away. A moment of bliss in a time of decay. Your eyelids are closed, Your limbs are numb. There's a passage to the great beyond. You feel heavy. Your mind is wandering. Torrents of cold embraces your skin. You created a path behind pain and suffering. It flows through your veins. Now there is peace within. And no one in this moment will tell you who you are. And no one in this moment will tell you what to do. And no one in this moment will tell you where to go. And no one in this moment will tell you what to feel. But someone in this moment has left you to be alone. Forgetting about the world around you. Forgetting what you are going through. All of a sudden, there's a guiding voice telling you to come back towards the light. And no one in this moment will tell you what to do. And no one in this moment will tell you who you are. And no one in this moment will tell you where to go. And no one in this moment will tell you what to feel. And no one in this moment will tell you what to do. And no one in this moment will tell you who you are. And no one in this moment will tell you where to go. And no one in this moment will tell you what to feel. But someone in this moment has left you to be alone.
I thought the first track was good. I liked the first track. It gave me birthday party Nick Cavey vocal vibes. But beyond that, it gave me like Bright Eyes vibes, which kind of is like indie acoustic rock and didn't feel goth adjacent at all. And I really hate Bright Eyes, so.
Okay, well, I'll go next, I guess. I also was, I turned on the first track and I was really engaged with that pretty quickly. similar. I had a very strong Nick Cave feeling about that, and I'm a big Nick Cave fan, so I enjoyed that. I listened to the rest. It didn't really bother me as much. It didn't associate with some band I dislike. I mean, I was getting lots of very varied vibes from it, between, you know, more things that were Nick Cave, a couple things that just sounded like he changed the words on a song or on a track from Murder Ballads. There were also some very heavy Leonard Cohen vibes. I got a bit of Mark Almond going on, and then some of the jazzier stuff reminded me of Serge Gainsbourg, and a little bit of Swans as well. The thing is, I was hearing all of these things that said, "Oh, that sounds like the Swans. That sounds like Leonard Cohen. That sounds like Nick Cave," but I wasn't really hearing anything that sounded like Dune Messiah, and that's kind of the problem I had with the band. Is it didn't really seem to have much of an identity. It felt a lot like he was just putting on a bunch of other characters and kind of doing them, but there was just something that wasn't quite right. I had got a little bit of an uncanny valley thing as I was listening to it. It's like, oh, okay, I can see I like this part, but then this other part is just, it's not clicking for me. So, I mean, overall, I found the album interesting. I liked some of what he was doing. I liked some of the ideas behind it, but I think the implementation needs work. And I think there needs to be some exploration of who he wants to be as an individual artist himself, or as a band themselves. I don't know how many people are involved in the creative process here. But that's kind of my takeaway on it.
So before Michelle takes a dump on the album, I have to admit, like, I kind of fucked up with the way I was going to review this, because I usually listen to the album the week of the episode recording, but I had forgot. So I listened to these at work, but I forgot that I was running a new hire training class at work. So I have had zero time to listen to this sort of analytically this week. I did listen to it casually a couple times, maybe a month ago. But what I wanted to do was really kind of focus in on the lyrics and understand the themes there and what they were trying to get across, which I can't really analyze, unfortunately. As far as the album, though, as I was listening to it, I did like it. I generally never listen to neo-folk because I'm always concerned that I'm going to be listening to some, like, racist piece of shit band that I just don't realize initially, and I just don't want to take that chance. Not to, like, besmirch an entire genre, but it seems to have a higher than normal amount of white supremacists in that community. As far as the music goes, I the two times I listened to it, I really enjoyed it because it was different than the stuff I normally listen to. I like the kind of Western sounding guitar themes in the album. I like when the horns come in, and I know that's like kind of stereotypical neo-folk fare, but considering that I don't ever listen to that music, it was nice sort of as a novelty. And the sort of lyrical themes I did pick up on were very like Western kind of what's the Stephen King novel?
You're talking Dark Tower?
Dark Tower, yeah. I got kind of like Dark Tower vibes from it. This sort of mysticism and otherworldliness to more grounded concerns in relational themes. But again, I wasn't really listening to the lyrics, so I can't give like a good analysis of what was going on there. But the couple times I listened to it, it was a nice kind of fantasy escape from the real world. So if I had to give a 1 out of 5 rating, I'd give it like a 2.5 as an average. I didn't hate it. I didn't love it. I thought it was interesting from the perspective of someone who never listens to this genre. Michelle?
I know. No, the first song I was like, okay. Again, I like Trey. I love Nick Cave. Like, okay, see what you're putting down here. I didn't think it was working as well as he seemed to think it was working. Also, can we talk about the fact that he had a 12-paragraph bio on his Bandcamp?
It was so long.
That turned me off like right there. I was like, all right, that's
quite pretentious.
That's a little, even, I mean, God, when a goth is calling you pretentious, that's bad news, man. And then after that, I mean, like Trey said, I was hearing a lot of his influences. Swans, definitely. Leonard Cohen. I thought a little King Dude in there. But none of it was working for me. A lot of the songs I couldn't even make it all the way through. I was, once I got the gist of it, I was kind of like skipping ahead to see, oh, maybe the next song will be better. And yeah, I didn't like it. I wanted to like it. I want to like new music, but I don't like it.
Fair enough. All right, well then let's close out the show with our Sinister Suggestions.
So you've got to be interested in death. It's the last great taboo. It's the only taboo left.
Precisely. I mean, why is it, do you think, that everyone in here is dressed in black? It's a celebration of death.
No, I just like the clothes.
Yeah, well, no, I mean, the clothes look good. Yeah, I mean, death looks good. Charles Manson, yeah? No, he was cool.
Don't know if I mentioned it before, but I'm actually a vampire.
Sinister Suggestions.
I'm trying to remember, did I mention Larkin Poe at a different episode already?
I don't think so.
Okay. Well, I'll recommend them then. So I don't know that much about them. It was one of those things I was listening to various musical things on YouTube and had the rare occasion when I wasn't sitting in a playlist that I created myself and just let it go to the next thing automatically. And this band appeared, and it was a pair of women who were playing, mandolin and slide guitar, doing sort of a dark folky country blues rock thing that I really quite enjoyed and listened to a bunch of their stuff and kind of got into them. They're not really terribly gothy. I mean, they're on the darker end of that sort of country blues rock. But I really enjoyed them. I liked the mix of instruments, and I thought they just had a really good presence. So people are interested in, in this album for its sort of folky, country-esque, murder ballady type stuff. Maybe check out Larkin Poe.
I have two, just because we were talking about fashion, so I wanted to rep some local designers. One being my friend Zoe, who does Thorns Clothing, and Michelle's good friends with Zoe as well. And she's coming out with these perfumes that smell like cloves. So I think if you go to her website,
they do. Oh my God,
you have one, but they're not for sale yet.
I do.
I'm dying to smell that.
Yeah, please give me that website.
I'll have to link it.
But it doesn't just smell like clove, like the spice. It smells like a clove cigarette.
Yeah, that's what
So it smells
assumed.
like the tobacco smoke, and it's incredible.
I'm half chub. I'm all in. What's the website?
Yeah, I'll have to link it. Her Instagram is just Thorns Clothing. But I'm more on Instagram.
Thorns?
Thorns.
As in what a rose
Thorns
has.
Gotcha.
Yeah. And then also...
That sounds... okay.
Yeah, it's amazing. I haven't smelled it, but I know Michelle has, so...
I'm wearing it right now.
How does it translate on the body? Is it like you just smoked like 20 cigarettes?
It's very subtle. Like you don't. I mean, it's not like you smell like an ashtray or anything like that. It's very subtle, but it's beautiful. I know she worked really hard to get it like just right.
So cool.
And it's definitely a success. It was very cool.
And I also want to mention a woman who does these really cool bleach t-shirts mostly. She goes by Bad Penny, so it's _Bad Penny on Instagram. And she recently did this amazing damned crop top and this Robert Smith one. They're just really beautiful bleach outs on black t-shirts, and they come out amazing. So you guys should all check that out.
Very cool. Yeah.
I have 2 books to recommend. One is actually it's not new, but I just read it, so it's new to me. I think it came out maybe earlier this year. And it's a novel called Circe by Madeline Miller. And it's just Greek mythology and witchcraft, and it's an absolutely engrossing, incredible story. And you don't need to know about Greek mythology going into it to understand it. And I know a lot of people think it's like a sequel to her prior book, which also centered on Greek mythology, but it's not. It's a standalone novel. And it was one of those books where you dread finishing it because it's such an engrossing world that you want to live in. So that was an awesome book. And then a forthcoming book is a book called Cat Call by Kristen Sollee. And I think I recommended her first book on another episode, which was called Witches, Sluts, and Feminists. So this is her follow-up book, and it's going to be out September 16th. And it is called, wait, I have to get the subtitle right. Cat Call, Reclaiming the Feral Feminine. So it's
I dig it.
Like the untamed history of the cat archetype through a feminist lens. And Kristen's writing is just absolutely incredible, and she's super cool.
To follow up on that, she's lecturing at my Goth Symposium I'm throwing on October 5th. So it's 5 women lecturing on goth topics, and she's one of the speakers. Anybody located in the New York area, you should definitely come out. She's speaking about the occult in goth music, which is going to be amazing.
I did want to ask, because I didn't get the opportunity, just in general, how the panel you had at Wavegotik Treffen went.
It went really well. I think that there was an interest. It was mostly women in the crowd, but there are some men who were genuinely interested in how that was going. And there are people listening, which is nice. And, you have to start somewhere. The room was packed. It was really exciting, actually. I didn't think anybody was going to show up, but it was great. You got to start somewhere.
All right. And so my sinister suggestion is, I don't know, if you're involved, if you're connected with more general like pop culture stuff, maybe this is passé. I don't know. I don't pay attention to those kind of podcasts and things. But I did just watch in the last couple weeks the Amazon exclusive show The Boys, which I haven't watched the last episode. I watched 7 of 8 episodes. But I really, really enjoyed the show. Basically the premise is like, what if superheroes were sociopathic narcissists fueled by capitalism? So they basically rip off the main DC superheroes like Batman and Wonder Woman and Superman and Aquaman and whoever else, and sort of they do a couple things. They sort of do the what happens to everyone after there's this epic superhero battle and they've destroyed all these buildings and all these people's lives have been affected. And then they also make the superheroes they go the other direction where they don't have this kind of ethical compass to guide their actions. They just kind of realize, oh, we're super powerful and we can do whatever the fuck we want, and we're going to do whatever the fuck we want. And so what happens when you have that within society? And I think it's really interestingly handled. There's a lot of serious topics that are covered, so kind of like content warning, as far as like abuse and sexual abuse and that kind of thing goes. That stuff gets explored within the show, but I think they do it in a really healthy way. But it can be difficult if you're prone to that. So I just want to throw that out there. But I have really enjoyed that, especially within the sort of, I've been really sick of the Marvel universe and the DC universe and all these kind of superheroes. I'm kind of over it. So seeing that different take on that mythos was kind of refreshing. So if you're into nerdy shit and you haven't watched The Boys yet, I recommend it.
I'll second that. I've seen the whole show.
Oh, cool. And it is like, I know, because I have friends on Facebook who have read the comics. I didn't even know it was a comic. And I read comics, so I feel kind of embarrassed about that. But just going into it blind with no expectations, I really, really enjoyed it. So
yeah, I didn't read the comics, so I've read other stuff by the same author, which I liked, though I'm not much into comics. I've only read a handful of them. But I have read other stuff by the same author, and he does tend to deal with very dark, serious, and explicit topics. He doesn't beat around the bush.
Yeah, which is good because I think, at least in the show, the way that those topics are handled are reflective of what happens in the real world. And it's not exploitative. It's not sensationalist. So I think they're handled well, in my opinion. So. All right. Thank you for listening. And thank you, Andi and Michelle, so much for coming on and chatting with us. It's always a pleasure. You are always welcome on the show, and we love you guys.
Yes, thank you.
Thank you, guys. That was awesome.
In 2 weeks, we're going to be back with a brand new episode. We'll be interviewing Bess Lovejoy, author of the book Rest in Pieces, and we're going to be chatting about death in our culture, death in our personal lives, death in a philosophical sense, and exploring some of the really fascinating stories around what happens to our bodies after we die, both the mundane and the absurd. So I'm really excited. I think that will be a fantastic episode. As always, this show only exists because of you. Everyone who supports us on Patreon is what keeps us going, keeps us moving, and keeps the lights on. So I like to take a moment each month to thank everyone who supported us on Patreon. If you would like to take a look at what kind of rewards you can get, or you just want to support the podcast and the content we're putting out, you can go to patreon.com/cemeteryconfessions. At the founders level for August, we have Jason of Junkyard Bat. You can find him on Etsy, one word, Junkyard Bat. He makes some really fantastic jewelry, of which I have some. So I recommend checking him out. SJ Esmeralda, Cadaver Kelly, who you can find on YouTube, making content about, well, goth stuff, music, lists, shopping, DIY tips, all kinds of stuff. Iris and Abigail, thank you all so much for supporting the show. At the Nocturnal Council level, we have Dawn, Jacob, Christina, Esther, Sav, Jen, Natalie, Michelle Smith, Azzy of Obscura Undead on the internet and on YouTube and a bunch of other places, postpunk.com most recently. Michelle Smith of Skullgirdle RIP on YouTube. Nephilim Incorruptus of YouTube as well. Fifth Dream, Eternal Winter of YouTube. You can check her content out as well. Amy, Mike Mess, William, and Nia. Thank you all so much for supporting the show. And then finally at the Crow's Call level, we have Dave of the Goth subreddit, Isabel, Audra, Kevin, Top Down Tom, Enya, Sarah, Morgan, David, Anna, Irene, Barnabas, Whitby, Abby, Jonathan, Bruce Lord of We Have a Technical and IDieUDie.com, Becca, Kelly, Dom, Felina, Santa, Death Metal Kumbaya, Elizabeth, King Rhinex, Marco, Alex, Jennifer, Kevin, Eduardo, Jan, Jason, Stuart, Isabel, Marissa, Kimberly, Alex Kennedy, the other half of IdaUdai.com and We Have a Technical Podcast, Annie, Richard, Mr. Polar Bear, Dagger Dance, Caroline Asgard of Caroline Sometimes, Alana, Bronwyn, David, Country Fried Goth, Mark, Gindalis, Angel, Keen, Sebastian, Anne, Heather, Wolfie, Kelly, Ryan, Susan, Kay, and Beth. Thank you all so much for supporting the show. Again, you can check us out at patreon.com/Cemetery Confessions. I won't give you the whole spiel, but we very much appreciate your support. This is a community podcast, and we're very happy to have you all in the Discord and supporting the show. So as I said, we will be back on the 16th. So until then, stay dark.
The preceding program is a member of The Belfry, a network of blogs, podcasts, and videos for the darkly inclined. Go to thebelfry.rip for more information.